From the esoteric capital of the world, this is Glastonbury Radio.
Welcome to the Avalon Rising radio show, coming at you from the heart chakra of the planet Glastonbury. Every week we invite amazing guest authors and researchers onto the programme to discuss their discoveries and ideas. We cover a huge range of subjects with a general focus on earth mysteries and esoterica, but also cutting edge discoveries in the realm of consciousness and quantum physics. You can check out our website at avalonrising.co.uk and download the shows 1 week after this original broadcast. And you can listen to the shows as well on glastonburyradio.com. So our guest this week is Gary King, who's a crop circle researcher based in Wiltshire. And I'll give you a brief outline of him before we go into the interview. In 1997, while ill health caused him to take time out from his work as a legal executive, Gary encountered his first crop circle. He was so deeply affected by this experience that he devoted himself to researching the phenomenon ever since, looking at the more esoteric aspects of the study, of some of the things we're going to look at today. And he also has an abiding interest in human consciousness, which prompted him to study the cultural use of psychedelic plants, and the evidence that such use enables contact with creative intelligences. He was also one of the 3 witnesses of the 777 Eastfield formation event, when a crop circle was seen being formed. And he's a much sought after tour guide and lecturer, and he runs, with the enigmatic Michael Glickman, cropcirclereporter.com. So Gary, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to speak to you, Hugh.
So Gary, what really drew you into the crop circle phenomenon?
It was, like many people who have stories when their life kind of changes and you come to a crossroads in your life. I was at a crossroads in my life. Many things were changing and coming to an end. My career, through ill health, had to take a break, and my marriage at the time. And it was at that time I was exploring, Tai Chi and some things that I'd done when I was younger, really just to look towards getting better health. And then a series of coincidences led me to some enigmatic people, one of whom brought me over here to Wiltshire and took me in my first crop circle, which was back in July '97. And I kind of never left, really. I stayed for sort of 14 years. This is my 14th consecutive season, full-time, bouncing around inside the formations.
Okay, great. So with the crop circle phenomenon, for people who don't know this, it's been going on for at least like 15, 20 years, but even going way back into prehistory as well. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that. But what do you make of this whole idea that Doug and Dave and all these kind of hoaxes make all the crop circles?
Well, it's the topic that maintains most of the focus of people who come around the phenomenon. Obviously when I first started, it was something I had to look into considerably, and I've maintained a stance sort of since then that I haven't, to my own satisfaction, seen enough evidence which can show me that people can go out, particularly 2 old guys, and construct these highly detailed formations over hundreds and hundreds of feet on uneven ground and not make mistakes over what is almost now 30 years of an ongoing sort of evolution of the phenomenon. And in doing so, demonstrate not only engineering skills of an unbelievable quality, but also to yield information such as the squaring of the circle, giving us new ways to back engineer 100 new ways to square a circle, something that's never been done in mathematical history, and so on. I need to see these teams. I need to see them now in front of me do these crop circles that we see, that because the ones I've seen them they have made and the evidence I have seen, they're pretty poor in comparison. So I'm open to the fact that there are teams of people who come here and that they don't make mistakes, and that they can maintain this sort of high level of sophistication. But I need to see more evidence. That's my position on it.
Yeah, I think we need to see some sort of scientific testing done with groups of them, really. I mean, one of the things I noticed after the Devices conference earlier this year was that someone had put a leaflet on all the cars saying that this guy and his team had made all the crop circles that season, and they decided this year just to not make as many near the major ancient sites. So I'm thinking, well, that's interesting. They're sort of like putting a sort of test out to the crop circle researchers. I propose that we approach them and we actually say, well, don't make any crop circles anywhere in Wiltshire until, say, the 1st of August, and let's see what happens. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's various proposals that have been put to these people. And we must say that we only ever see a couple of people who are apparently spokespersons for teams of people who largely remain anonymous. We encounter the same sort of individuals over and over. And, the interesting thing about this whole phenomenon, if you look at it from this perspective, is that on the one hand, we have the man-made theory. And it seems very evident to me that these people who claim that they do them could prove it to us. We could give them an envelope with 7 formations in that they've already done and said, look, you don't have to actually show us then. Go out at night over the next week and make them for us. And at the end of the week, we'll be more convinced that you're doing them because you've repeated formations, which is something that's never been done. And they're the ones we've given you in an envelope. So they could prove it, and they don't. They choose not to. And they say that they like to do that because they like to reveal paranormal investigators such as myself and Michael who are tricking the public or making money off of it or so on. And so they spend a lot of their time attacking us and asking us to prove that it's paranormal. Okay, so if it's paranormal, which, a lot of us believe that it is, then the agency which is responsible for this, superhuman, extraterrestrial, God, fairies, whatever, also has the ability to step forward and prove it to us. But it chooses not to. And so here are some of us mortals in a dilemma where we have no evidence that can really overwhelmingly prove something. And we look more towards science and quantum physics and research which is of a more credible nature to try and wrap it together with mysteries which have been with humanity for a very long time, such as, encounters with divine, encounters with extraterrestrials, which started Bibles and so on, which is very prolific, and ancient monuments.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's something that I've been researching myself, is to do with the orb phenomenon. Because when you look back into history, you start noticing that all the fairies and the elementals and will-o'-the-wisp all seem to be sort of connected to what we now today see as like the balls of light or the orb phenomenon.
Exactly. And this is where we see, and you see, I think I've come to believe one of the great things that I've experienced personally in my encounter with this phenomenon is the multiple ways you can now kind of look at things. And I look at life now where you see the connections between things as more important in some ways than the things themselves. And when we see a history of us relating to some other, and it's often it's depicted as either divine and benevolent or in some ways evil and terrible, there's always been a reference to another. And today it takes on a modern technological form in UFOs and technology and so on and so on. But we're still talking about balls of light which fly around, people see in their thousands, and mysterious phenomena. But the crop circles are different from all of that in that they're on the ground for weeks and people can walk in them.
Yeah, they're like what Steve Alexander calls a temporary temple, isn't it?
Yeah.
So with the balls of light phenomenon, one of the bits of research which I find fascinating is the BLT research team, especially Nancy Talbot and John Burke, have been focusing on how these balls of light have been seen around crop circles, and there's effects within the crop circles themselves, like burst nodes, which also help to verify if they're real crop circles or not. But what do you make of this idea that, if these balls of light or whatever they are do make them, then how is it done? I mean, what is the force and intelligence behind it?
Oh, that's the $64,000 question, isn't it? I mean, yeah, we can look towards, kind of our short scientific kind of history of 60 or 70 years of the way that we look at the world and kind of reduce things in a reductionist theory and say that there are anomalies to certain things, which don't readily give us answers. They just say that there are anomalies, and a lot of this stuff suggests that there are some conclusions to their research, which I've always found interesting, which show that the plants in some of them appear to show that microwaves, magnetism, and electricity, those three terrestrial energies, have impacted the plants. And this is demonstrated by the elongation of the nodes, which suggests rapid heating on the inside of the stem. And as the moisture, the steam needs to escape, it can sometimes blow the nodes and create expulsion cavities. This is a good indication for people who want to see physical evidence to the plant material that some kind of energy has impacted these plants. But sometimes we don't get this, and we still have a beautiful pattern, which of course leaves it open to saying, oh, well, this is not a genuine crop circle. But I think we should always exercise caution in dealing with the unknown, in creating categoric litmus tests based on 3D reality, which either prove or disprove something, because we can fall into traps with that. So, you know, yes, it provides us with anomalies. The 7-7 formation that I was witness to, which we'll talk about later, there was some wonderful research done into that. But the samples were sent off to Levengood and Burke, and there was a 12-page report conducted which showed that plasma energy had been used in creating the formation or impacting the plants, and it wasn't only present in the wheat that had been laid down, it was present in the wheat that was all over the field.
Okay, so it had kind of quite a far-ranging effect then.
Yeah, it was something that Burke described that he'd never seen this before, because the control samples taken from northeast, south and west of that formation all displayed evidence that they'd been impacted by a plasma energy which had dislodged the electrons from the orbit, which is why when we walked into it early in the morning, every footstep sounded like static electricity, and it was like crackling.
That's absolutely fascinating. So, you know, so this is on the night of the 777 thing, when you were doing a night watch out in Wiltshire. Can you maybe tell us a bit about that now?
Sure, yeah. It was funny because, you know, again, in your life, it marks something. And it was 10 years for me since my first crop circle. And I kind of, in my own personal journey, wanted to round things up and confirm that I was on the right path in some way. And so, you know, I sort of said my prayers and was thinking about mushrooms and psychedelics and so on. And my girlfriend at the time, Paula, was you know, we'd been sort of talking about this thing for 5 or 6 years and discussing it. And so I decided that, you know, just for some strange reason, that I was going to go up on this hill. And I'd had a number of coincidences happen the day before, which was strange, more on reflection. But we got onto this hill about 1:30 a.m. on Knapp Hill, which overlooks Eastfield, a very famous field for crop circles. The first big pictogram came down there in 1990. And when we got there, we met up with this guy called Winston Keach, who was a UFO researcher who had all these cameras set up to observe Eastfield and some of the surrounding area to see if he could catch, you know, any kind of strange phenomenon. So we sat down with him, and he was a really interesting guy. Turned out he was something of a boffin, a bit of a genius, had worked on Rolls-Royce engines and was a scientist. And so we were having a great chat. He was talking at things from a scientific point of view, and I was sort of coming at things from a metaphysical point of view. So it felt really, there was high energy, and we really felt that, you know, excited at the evening. And then about 3 o'clock in the morning, a big white flash of light, sort of just one strike of lightning just flashed. And, you know, it was kind of surreal. It was nothing more than that. But we talked about it for a minute, and Wynne looked at his watch and realised that it was just after 3, and he'd got some tapes that were running on cameras that were set up on his van down below that were running some 4-hour videotape. He'd started at 11, so he thought, oh, shit, I've got to go and change these tapes. So he went off. He was gone about 20 minutes, and Paula and I had sat there, and strangely, a skylark had come and sung above our heads in the dark, which was something that I'd never heard before and was surreal. And then Wynne came back up, and we sat there for a few more minutes, and then I said, oh, you know, it looks like there's a shadow or something. I didn't know what it was. There was like a feeling that there was something there. So he put this infrared kind of camera on that he had, this image-enhancing camera, and looked down at Eastfield, and then it was like my first impression, he called to me and said, you've got to look at this, and we jumped up, and my first impression was that we were looking at the Julia set, like that was at Stonehenge in '96, because all we saw were these concentric circles getting smaller with little grape shots around them. But as he expanded the viewfinder, it just got bigger and bigger and went over 2 hills, and it looked like this great big dragon with tentacles. And we couldn't see it still with our eyes. It was still completely dark, but through this camera we could see it so clearly. And that's actually on a YouTube video that you can watch. The actual footage is on there of what we could see. It was the most exciting day of my life, I have to tell you. We were jumping around like children and waited for the sun to come up, and then walked down, and Paul and I walked into it, and every footstep just crackled with so much energy. We had a headache and a sore throat for about 5 days afterwards. It was one of the most powerful crop circles I've ever been in my life.
That sounds actually quite an amazing experience. But so then samples were sent off to Levengood, Talbot and Burke and their team in America.
Yeah.
And you got these amazing results back as well. But so this sort of flash of light, it sounds like that kind of was part of the creation of the formation and had an effect over the whole field, according to the report that came back, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, that's it all bears that out, because I think as I can recall, Levengood makes the report can be viewed on Linda Moulton Howe's Earth Files website. But as I recall, he says that the reason that the other plants were affected was because of this flash rather than balls of light, which would have been more sort of site specific.
Okay, that's really interesting. That's quite different to the famous Oliver's Castle formation that was videoed in 1996. There's a bit of a debate about that, as we all know, whether it was a hoax, it was computer graphics, this, that, and the other. Yeah. But that's a whole different kind of look. You saw these balls of light come in from a distance. There were several of them. They followed through some hedges and then created this circle, going around kind of in circles, and then parted and disappeared. And that formation appeared within just a few seconds, didn't it? So what do you make of that in relation to what you witnessed yourself on 777?
Well, it comes back to this point I made earlier about the circle makers of the others, the girls upstairs, as Michael and I affectionately call them. It seems to me could jump out and give us the evidence that they need, but we seem to be tantalized, don't we, with seemingly slightly different phenomenon, which would tend towards leaning for, oh look, there is something here, but it always seems to ask us to make an extra leap. And to me, the Oliver's Castle footage, when I looked at it in more detail, you have 1996 video technology, which is shaking up and down. The horizon's constantly moving, and it's 25 frames a second. And these balls of light are constant. And the actual footage, remember, was much longer. What you see on YouTube is like 14 seconds or 37 seconds or whatever it is. But the actual footage, he was watching these balls of light fly around for ages. He actually never saw, when he was questioned, the formation going down because he was so transfixed on the balls of light. So they were flying around there. And this footage, when tried to be replicated using 2004 technology, when Terry Toffness made his video, he tried to get a couple of Disney animators to recreate the Oliver's Castle footage using 2004 animation technology. And they said the difficulty was that you had to use the old technology, and the 25 frames a second meant, because it was wobbling around, the horizon was going up and down, you had to keep these things constant, and it takes time. And so they put forward their best effort after 3 days of trying, and it still didn't come up as good as the Oliver's Castle footage. Now, couple that with the fact that that formation, it wasn't there the day before, and it was there after, and it's 7-fold geometry, which is like 51.51 degrees, very complicated, and all of the controversy that surrounded it by the same sort of characters that jumped out on me after 7/7 saying, oh yeah, we made it, they were deluded or whatever. I was convinced that there's something real to that, but it's different. There's balls of light, but it's connected because both phenomena, in my view, are making crop circles.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm quite convinced by that. And if anyone wants to check it out for themselves, they can just look on YouTube, I guess, type in Oliver's Castle Formation 1996 and kind of sort of look at it for themselves. They even got on TV programs as well, I think, on like ITV. Anyway, we better go to a break now, but we'll continue this conversation after this break, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
From the Tor to the Chalice Well, from the Abbey to the Georgian Pilgrim, this is Glastonbury Radio.
Okay, so welcome back to the Avalon Rising radio show. You're listening to it at glastonburyradio.com. In the studio today, we're talking with Gary King about crop circles, and specifically what we've just been discussing, and we're going to continue now, is about the formation of crop circles and such ones that have been caught on camera. So we were talking about the Oliver's Castle formation, Gary, and these balls of light. I mean, I'm quite interested in the idea that how can these balls of light just sort of move about intelligently? You know, what are they really? I mean, and are these the same sort of things that were really reported back in prehistory, like these sort of fairies and elementals? I mean, we did touch on this briefly earlier, but I'm sure there's some connection there with Earth energies even. There must be, because you're talking about terrestrial energies, like electrical, plasma, and all this kind of stuff. So what's the connection?
It's very interesting because, catalyzing my research into crop circles was also this kind of coincidental look at shamanic use of psychedelic plants. And the more you look into it, and the more you, like for example, the Amazonian shamans which use ayahuasca, their paintings have always depicted kind of flying objects. You look at the Hindu Vedas and they talk of the Vimana. And, you go around almost all of the ancient civilizations, and there's some reference to a kind of conscious otherworldly craft or lights or beings that are flying around or visiting us, or they're seen then and they're seen now regularly by these Amazonian shamans. They talk of them and put them in their paintings. And so the connection for me was, okay, I was in Mexico in March talking at Jaime Maussan's conference in the World Trade Center, and Eric von Daniken was there. And, his whole thing on Chariots of the Gods was that aliens visited years ago and Pan spawned the human race. And I was able to discuss with him my look at mushrooms and the fact that mushroom spores, it's been found by Dr. Paul Stamets in America, that mushroom spores are very likely to be the first catalysts of creating topsoil on this planet. And that they can exist in a vacuum. They absorb radiation, much like plants absorb sunlight to create energy. And that when they first sort of landed on this planet, which was a ball of rock, they would have calcified the rock to create humus and topsoil, which then sustained plant life and eventually human life. And when we look at our DNA, we find we've got more mushroom fungal DNA inside of us than we have human. And when we look at the mushroom mycelium, and the more deeper you go with it, Paul Stamets has put forward a theory that it represents more of a neurological network than it does a kind of plant root structure. It literally knows we are there. When we walk across the ground, each footstep has 300 square miles of this stuff, mycelium underneath it, and it literally reaches up and grabs the debris to create more soil and sustain life. It works in symbiosis. So there we have this massive one-cell thick web network, which is so similar to our neural network in our brain, so similar to even clusters of galaxies when you look at them from in the universe, a kind of model for a structure that exists everywhere. It transports water over vast areas, and water, as we know, can create electrical potential and consciousness. When we're looking at quantum stuff, we're talking about waves and particles and things being able to transform from one place to another. It seems to me that, we may be dealing with larger consciousnesses. I mean, modern science dismisses the research that was done in the 60s into plants being conscious when those lie detector tests were done and the plants were responding to intentions to harm even other beings near them. But, there's actually overwhelming evidence that consciousness exists in so many areas, and these things would have been depicted as fairies, gods, or whatever, of the water, of the spirits, and so on. And respect and interconnectedness was something that would have seemed to have been honoured. It certainly was in ancient civilizations, it seems.
Yes, certainly. It sounds like, to me, it's kind of like another representation of the sort of Gaia theory. But looking at it from like a sort of more fungaloid perspective, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so you think possibly these kind of energies and consciousness you're mentioning here could somehow be related to the intelligence and the creation of the crop circles then?
Well, yeah, because my old take on it is that human beings, when you look at one of the things that the crop circles have in common, when I take tour guides around, I ask people why they've come here, and they all overwhelmingly say, we think the world's pretty crappy at the moment, and it could be a lot better. and we're destroying it, and the human race is sort of going up its own arse. And that they're looking for hope. Regardless, the issues of man-made and so on come forward, but overwhelmingly, people are looking for something, and they're looking towards past knowledge to integrate with new knowledge, and everybody's talking about 212 and evolution and so on and so forth, and that we need to find a new way. And so one of my takes on it is that human potential is largely overlooked in our education systems and what we can do creatively. And when people take psychedelic plants, mushrooms, marijuana even, Carlos Santana was interviewed about his use of drugs and his influence on his creativity, where he gets intelligence that gives new solutions to things or opens up new doors to things. He said, oh yeah, we played the blues and used to smoke marijuana and it used to open up doors to us. And then he used some of the more serious plants like peyote and found that they were kind of peeling him like layers of an onion to reveal his true self. And as he was finding that, he was finding his own identity, and he was finding more creativity and more openness to people and the world. So when the psychedelics are looked at in that way, they're very integrative. All the experiments seem to show that they try to integrate people with themselves and integrate with other people and cultures and so on. And there's lots of evidence that ancient civilizations all use these kinds of plants, which bring on these states of consciousness. Today, we have alcohol, which we know is disintegrative and kind of separates people, and we have a mass culture of that. And so we have probably resulting problems that are connected to those sorts of things, in that we don't relate to another, whatever it is, a void, an indivisibility where there is intelligence, in a way which integrates us with it. We are skeptical about another, a place where we can go and get, as I say, reintegrative, transformative information. Mm. And many people that come to the crop circles, in my experience over the years now, have gone into crop circles and have spoken to me then and years later and said that the experience has somehow driven them down a path where they are moving towards more reintegrative stuff with themselves, their own identity, and indeed their colleagues, friends, relationships, and the world itself, and trying to kind of, have more hope and paint a better future. It's interesting that psychedelics and crop circles, in my view, kind of do the same thing to a lot of people.
They're kind of like teachers, like the way that the plants are like the teachers. It's almost like that to me. The crop circles are the teachers. The way they teach us geometry, they teach us about surveying and about interaction with the ancient sites, and they draw us to the ancient sites as well. Yeah. There's so many elements to these crop circles, and even the work of the BLT research team in America. If it wasn't for the crop circle research they did, they never would have found all their fertility technology research that came from that, the way they can enhance seeds and grains and things like this. So there's a whole lot more to them than meets the eye. And from a personal note, I would never have got into anything interesting if it wasn't for initially the crop circles kind of opening up my mind to other worlds and other possibilities.
Exactly. I mean, and there are, in fact, so many other people that can say that. I mean, John Martineau's wonderful little wooden book, The Little Book of Coincidence, that work was originally inspired by him looking at the tangential geometry of crop circles and realizing that some of these whole number ratios, which conform to the way we perceive music, which bypasses the intellect, right? We just know how the notational scale works and rhythms work and so on, conforms to the way that the planets are laid out in whole number ratios. And indeed, the ancient civilizations knew this and encoded it in their ancient monuments. As above, so below, he's shown with plants and planets, and crop circles have all displayed this. So the geometry of it always brings us back to the mystery of nature itself, and that there are perhaps simple answers, which includes all of us individually and collectively in the story of creation. Or if you look at it from a Richard Dawkins kind of, we're specks and mean nothing and we've got no more than a few more genes than a piece of a mouse or something, then, you can look at yourself in two ways, but each way is connected to our identity, how we see ourselves, and connected to something bigger. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I also find fascinating with crop circles is the way that they draw you out into certain parts of the landscape which would never have any human connection before. perhaps to where energy lines crossed, perhaps to a power point or where a sacred site used to be. And they draw you out into these places, but also the geometries that have obviously been incorporated into stone circles and pyramids and other such structures are also becoming evident within the crop circles, as though there seems to be some intricate connection with ancient sites to do with the placement of them and the geometries and several other aspects. I mean, what do you make of that, especially as obviously most of the crop circles appear in Wiltshire, which is the most megalithic area in Britain?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt, an important area, you know, and much talk is made about it. But I mean, one example for example, you've got the Hungerford Formation, the Crooked Soley Formation that Alan Brown and John Michel wrote a book about individually about that formation.
Yeah.
It was a mitochondrial DNA spiral, which had 1,296 elements. 792 of them, I think, were standing and 504 flattened. This 792 and 504. Now, these numbers, 7920 is the diameter of the Earth in miles, geometry, measure of the Earth. 792 is the measure of the Earth in miles diameter. 504 is the combined radius of the Earth and the Moon combined, which John Michel discovered square the circle, the symbol of uniting heaven and earth. And so when you go to Stonehenge, what they don't tell you on the guide there is that the outer ring of Stonehenge is 79.2 feet and the inner blue stones is 50.4 feet. So those numbers, which square the circle, are encoded into Stonehenge. When you add those two numbers together, you get 1296. 1296, when converted into gematria, the language of the Greeks, you know, their letters you could convert into numbers. Hebrew's the same. When you convert 1296 into numbers, you get the goddess of all creation. And so that crop circle depicting the mitochondrial DNA, which can only be passed from the mother down. It'll only go through the female line, points back to the primordial Eve, and encodes the numbers of Stonehenge, an ancient monument down the road, and, you know, informs us about a heavenly dimension between the moon and the earth. Now, if that's not cosmic information, it informs us that we are surrounded by these simple coincidental miracles, which are dismissed as just mere coincidences. And then we find it in a crop circle 350 foot wide in wheat, which the center of which has not been touched. I mean, you know, that one crop circle alone, for me, informs us that there are massive connections between us and this place of Wiltshire and these ancient monuments, and indeed heaven and earth itself and what our notions of that are.
Yeah, and then the farmer cut it down within hours, didn't he?
He did, yeah. It was August and time for harvest. I'm not sure. I don't know the complete story if it was malicious or not, but, you know, it was fortunately captured by a photographer. We've got pictures of it. Alan Brown and John Michel wrote that wonderful book about it, which when you read it and you read the series of coincidences in there, where it was placed and between King's Farm and Queen's Farm and Upper Farm and Lower Farm, and it was, I mean, that one formation and the implications of that, together with all the others of squaring the circle that were contained in quintuplets that we didn't know about for 20 odd years until Michael Glickman discovered it. Yeah. I mean, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, isn't there? I mean, like just for my hometown in Cambridge, back in 1991, there was the famous Mandelbrot set formation, which caused a huge sensation. There's some amazing stories I've recently been looking into and discovered with that. Like, I mean, you probably know about this, and I'd like to get your view on it. But exactly 1 year before, someone sent in a letter to the New Scientist magazine and said, when with all these crop circles that are being formed, where we actually see a Mandelbrot set appear in the fields. And then exactly 1 year to the day later, that appears. And then the night before it happened as well, there was a woman who saw these strange blue lights moving over towards the field and had time dilation experiences, which a lot of people have when they have sort of so-called alien abductions. And then that formed there and then. And then I recently discovered that it's actually on the Michael energy line as well.
Really?
Almost runs right next to it. And there's several mounds, tumuli, just close by. And so, and that was the first super sort of interesting, complicated formation that appeared, along with the other one in Wiltshire that year. I think, I don't know where that was. Oh, Barbary Castle, wasn't it?
That's right.
And then that's kind of opened up a whole new world and whole new insights into the whole crop circle phenomenon. And then wasn't it a few days later or a few weeks later, Doug and Dave claimed to have made them all?
It was very close to that time. That's right. I mean, you know, and it's for some people, it was like, oh, because it's so clever, it has to be man-made, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, it's funny, you know, I stayed in some university digs a few years ago back in Cardiff, and the landlord there was a scientist himself. And he remembered looking at that in the New Scientist magazine and just thinking, oh, well, it's just a bunch of college students, math students who've gone out there and made it. Nice one, guys. But when he reconsidered it, and the curving line, the nature of the way that line decreases around that kind of bug-like image, and the way that, you know, the implications of what that is and how difficult that would be to recreate, he reconsidered how difficult that would have been to actually do as a physical thing, you know, especially without making a mistake on a physical level.
Yeah, sure.
But what the whole subject of fractals have brought to us with this kind of duality of the way of looking at things, that as you home in towards something, the perspective widens so that you get two kinds of results from your inquiry. That's a very interesting metaphor for me.
Okay. But again, I want to come back to this whole idea of the connection with ancient sites, because I've been discussing this with a lot of people over the years, because I've been into it probably almost as long as you have, actually, sort of looking at these crop circles. But the idea that because they're always in the vicinity of ancient sites, and sometimes not megalithic sites, sometimes these earth mounds or tumuli or barrows or whatever you want to call them, that I just get a sense there's some strong connection there. And then when we look at John Burke and the BLT research into these ancient sites that they've been analysing, that they're all kind of energy generators. And they create some kind of energy field around them. Some people call it orgone, others call it kind of chi energy or natural earth energy, and telluric energies. And so do you think this, you know, it seems like that they've been created to sort of harness the natural forces, and they're the conduit for the crop circles. And then there seems to be some kind of then the sort of mystery is the intelligence behind it, which decides what designs to do, you know, by using that energy kind of machine to do it with. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
That's a very interesting. I mean, my thoughts on it are that I'm very into Chinese philosophy. I'm very into martial arts. I'm very into Chinese medicine. I believe that 8,000-year-old tradition of acupuncture and not knowing an energetic system to our body, and using needles and harnessing certain points, nodal points on that system, I believe it works very well. I've seen evidence which completely satisfies me, having seen video of people having open heart surgery without anaesthetic because they've got a couple of needles stuck into various places around their body, convinces me that there's something to it. So why not, you know, that, you know, what's on one scale as a fractal would suggest to us is on another scale. What, you know, it's just repeated, self-replicative. So the Earth containing a net, which is has nodal points like the mycelial mat that I had described earlier, or like the meridian system in our bodies. To have things placed in certain places around that makes sense to me, that it would change or transform flows of energy, much like Chinese medicine does. So I think that, you know, the art of feng shui and geomancy that goes around looking for, you know, points where natural energy would emerge in our bodies and by correlation the Earth itself, is overwhelming to me. The ancient sites in Ireland, the round towers, there was wonderful research done on that, on the nature of how they seem to harness energy at the top of them in certain dates, when if you went up in the top of the towers, you know, your consciousness changed just by being up there. Why were these things created in those locations with doors 10 feet high off the ground, you know, of a certain stone? So to me, the nature of energies being present here, going back to electricity, microwaves, and magnetism that are in crop circles, that can be harnessed and used in different ways, is like earth alchemy. And we've got to remember that the interesting thing then about that is that we have had Normans and Romans coming here, and only 25% is estimated of these ancient sites remain. So we've got, you know, Silbury Hill and West Kennet Long Barrow and Avebury, which has got a road running through it and a pub, and most of the stones have been taken down to build a village. and Stonehenge, which is this kind of big tourist area. But how they would be used to be activating the energy that's creating crop circles now, I haven't seen enough evidence which would show me that. I certainly think that the land itself and, you know, the energies around, just around here myself, I see people come and drive around certain places, and it seems that there's so much mystery in this land. You, especially with time, you know, you can feel that you're driving down a road and it's taken an hour to drive down the road, and you've driven down it so many times a day, and sometimes it feels like 5 minutes. There's a real subjective, objective play on time around some of the areas around here, and I think the ancients were more sensitive to that, and certainly knew how to harness it in ways, and that maybe they're teaching us to do that. Who knows?
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to have to go to another break now, but we'll be back in a few minutes, so please join us then.
From the esoteric capital of the world, this is Glastonbury Radio.
Welcome back to the third segment of the Avalon Rising Radio show on glastonburyradio.com. We're here talking with Gary King about crop circles, consciousness, psychedelics, and many other amazing subjects. And so we were talking a lot about interaction with the landscape with ancient sites, but one of the things I want to jump back to is this whole idea of the web, a sort of psychedelic kind of fungaloid web around the planet that these mushrooms have. One of the things that interests me is the whole idea that mushrooms, when we ingest them, they actually have an experience of a human rather than just us having an experience of the mushrooms. So what do you feel about that as a kind of interactive kind of device that they kind of create?
Well, yeah, this is the bit that really interests me, because you see, some people say to me, look, if the crop circles are a message for us, why don't they just write it in English so that we can all understand it, right? And we talk about written language or verbal language as the kind of pinnacle of mode of communication, or the only kind of rational mode of communication. But, you know, dreams and visions and kind of empathetic, sympathetic resonance images that can come up when we're in certain areas or with certain people, these things dancers experience when they express things through their body. We have emotional intelligences and bodily kinesthetic intelligences, and they all speak to us in different ways, like smells with memories and so on. And so when you take a psychedelic, they can play around with your hearing or your smell, or show you that there are different modes or modalities of communication. And so many people report that they are in the presence of another being, and that this being is there interacting with you at the same time. And evidence shows that you need a certain amount of your own energy to have that experience, because if you take a psychedelic the next day, it doesn't work. So there's a kind of, you know, we have to go halfway and share in a place, another dimension which we are connected to, where other beings exist. And those beings, it seems to me, can take a generic form. They can present themselves in a number of ways, fairies maybe, or aliens, or snakes, or whatever. It seems to me, in my own experiences, that they would try to do it in a way that would be more comfortable, so that you're not frightened and that you're okay in dealing with what's there. There seems to need to me to be a corresponding way of being open and honest with yourself and stuff with regards to these beings, because there's a kind of more subtler communication going on, where vibrations and things that are connected with kind of not being honest or not being open and so on don't work. And I get this feeling that there's a sort of gentleness around that, around where we've got some vulnerabilities and blockages in my experiences. I find these things very transformative, and if approached in the right way, as it seems these ancient cultures did, very integrative, and potentially very integrative for humanity and for, you know, people on small and larger scales.
It just does seem like that it was a cultural kind of thing if we go back into history and prehistory. probably before the Christian kind of thing. It just seems like mushrooms would have been used in a certain way where it was just a group thing, cultures. There'd be no kind of like stigma attached to it. It was just, you just have it as part of your food and your daily life almost. And I kind of get a real sense that we're really missing that in this culture. And if we did bring it back in somehow, it would actually transform the culture and the society that we live in, and it'd be much more harmonious.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Terence McKenna, you know, a big proponent, obviously, of saying that, you know, societies are run, and there's a number of plants which are endemic to certain cultures, and the ones that are in a Western culture are alcohol and tobacco and sort of disintegrative plants, and that societies which seem to be the ancient ones that, you know, there's overwhelming evidence that the Mayans and the Egyptians and all that used plants which alter your consciousness in these ways, are more sort of integrative and reintegrative. And if people share a collective association or relationship with those plants, which gives them access to another realm where transformative knowledge can be gained and brought back and used in material reality to build pyramids and so on and so forth, then, you know, these things being seen as teachers or higher beings or access to higher realms and so on and so forth. And then, you know, the evidence that I mentioned earlier of these things actually catalyzing life on this planet and being an integrative part of our DNA, these mushroom spores and mushroom fungal DNA, it just seems to me that there's this wonderful interconnected web where a lot of the simple things, plants which are prolific everywhere, if taken in the right way, in the right context, setting is everything, bring people together and forge better relationships than the ones we've got now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It kind of just makes sense. I think this whole shamanic viewpoint is now coming back in to people's consciousness again. It seems like it's been lost for a long time, and it seems to be naturally just coming back in, and the plants provide it for us. I sense with ayahuasca, for instance, which is the Amazonian plant sort of medicine, that it's actually decided to do a world tour. And she actually wants to get out there and see the world through us. It's not just about us taking it.
Oh, absolutely. You know, absolutely. I mean, I'm so pleased to hear you say she and in that way, in an affectionate way. And also, you know, my teacher used to say to me that, you know, there's plans for world domination in the plant kingdom within our consciousness. You know, like you've got peyote out there doing his bit, and you've got ayahuasca doing this big bit in Brazil, and they've got, you know, they've merged some of it with Christianity and incorporated some of these bits and pieces. But essentially, you've got a sacrament that's a plant that's taken seriously as a being. That you know, I keep being reminded as I'm talking to you about Polden Jenkins' interview when he said that the crop circles, he said, they don't ram through your door. He said, it seems to me that, you know, big flashes of light or balls of light could turn off our electricity and say to us, look, listen to us, we're here. But they don't do that. They're out in the middle of these fields in this beautiful area, pointing us gently in a direction that we could go in. And when we get here, they don't give us ready answers. They just kind of gently say to us, what do you think? What's your view on this? How do you respond to this? And that's much like what happens when you engage the psychedelics.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, coming back to the crop circles again, I've only got about 8 or 10 minutes left. So I wonder if we could just have a little chat about the 2010 season. If you could give us some insights into what you've seen this year.
Well, it's been a very interesting season for a number of points. Michael and I started this new website, cropcirclereporter.com. It was a hefty task. I had to go on a learning curve of editing video and going out and using video cameras and getting used to technology. That was a learning curve for me. But we managed to put I think it was about 37 blogs on there. Some wonderful photos that Olivier Morel took, and some of Steve Alexander's pictures. And Michael and I doing sort of commentary on the couch at Michael's house, plus some in a video that I took inside formations that I got to quite early on. Now, I think that from day one, from the old Serum formation that we did a lovely blog on, in Rapeseed, right through to the end of the season, that we've seen some stunning formations. This season seems to have been one that's been heavily dogged by the whole man-made issue again. and various. There's a guy that's been out in the fields, and someone was caught apparently making the formation at Eastfield, and that's led to a lot of speculation about a lot of other formations and so on and so forth. But again, for my own sort of sanity, rather than keep going round and round in circles with that old chestnut, I step back a little bit and sort of say, okay, if we look at all the formations, I think there's about 55 or something like that, it's 57. Put all the pictures out on the floor and say, okay, we agree that those ones are man-made, those ones are man-made, those ones are man-made. Put them all to one side and leave the pile that's left that we agree maybe are in a grey area or that we think are genuine. Then we've got a lot that could potentially be talked about. But most people talk about the issue of the man-made thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's good psychological reasons for that. I think these wonderful formations show us humanity in all its ways and in all its frailties and strengths, and we need to engage all of this. What concerns me is when people fight against each other, or there's conflicts over essentially what is unknown. Going back to what I said at the beginning. Both sides, the men who make them and the phenomenon itself, could come forward and prove it's genuine. And while that's not really there categorically, we could act better as human beings and be civil to each other and say that we're on a journey and that we're trying to discover new things, and that some of us have got different views, but personal attacks and attacks on people's character and credibility and things of that nature. They're really things I think that we're being shown we need to try and rise above, and perhaps, look at moving forward from some of these old arguments that have gone round and round, and see if we can find a way of engaging the real mystery. Because even if there is, even with the crooked soli formation that I mentioned earlier, and the quintuplets that have revealed so much to us, there's much richness that we could all be sharing and enjoying together, rather than fighting over some claims of one way or another that's not categorically been proved.
Yeah, there is just a general hoo-ha with the whole crop circle thing, isn't there? But is there anything else? Is there any particular formations that really grabbed your attention this year, that really inspired you?
Well, I went in a lot of them. I took tours of people to them. I take very small groups to formations, and we have a lovely day talking about some of the geometry and some of the nice things that we found out, and we discussed many things. And I've sat in some lovely, beautiful formations like the Churton Bottom formation for me, the lay inside Barley. I always love. I got to that fairly early and filmed it. There's a blog of that on my site, which is worth looking at. But for me, I never got to them, but the Wickham Green formations, the two formations that straddled the M4, that when put together made the face that looked like a kind of enigmatic Jesus or messianic kind of Shroud of Turin or something.
Yeah.
I've been particularly intrigued by those. I sadly never got to them. It was the day I spoke at the Devices Conference, so the farmers came out and got angry and cut them down. But I spoke to some people who went to them, and I just think that's so ingenious to put two formations across a road that when you put them together it makes an image. I mean, the creativity sometimes, and the many ways I've seen even the wheat can be laid down and folded. You would never thought it possible, but I'm always in awe at the creativity and the different imaginative ideas that come out. So those two for me, I think, were this year's enigmatic ones.
Yeah, because it just seems like they really are like art, and this is something I've heard you talk about in some of your lectures.
Yeah,
there's a real kind of artistic sort of creativity and beauty and harmony within them. It kind of makes you want to kind of let go of the whole thing of who made them, was it humans, was it aliens, or was it whatever, and actually just enjoy them as an art form.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you're struggling with is it real or is it not, you're going through a struggle, okay? And struggle is necessary for growth. Evolution proves that. We need to struggle to grow. And so when you're struggling with that, okay, you can get angry and you can get fed up and you can get this, that, and the other, but you're struggling and it's okay. But, I went through that struggle, and for me, I find lots of richness in some of these other things like that. And art in human beings, I find I went and watched Billy Elliot in Victoria Palace the other day, and I watched this 13-year-old boy from Scotland. It was his debut as the new Billy Elliot, do ballet and tap dance with all these people on stage. And for me, human potential of creativity is akin to this other, this relationship to a muse that Socrates talked about, where his wisdom come from. That, you know, generations of ancient civilizations have had a connection to another that can make us more than human. The African people I've seen dancing, you know, ascribe it to other forces coming through them. So this connection to art and creativity that I see coming out of the crop circles, that I can see coming out of human beings, is the same for me. And I thank the day that I come into a crop circle and it's revealed this magic that can come out of human beings and the fields of Wiltshire equally. That's the magic that it's done for me.
No, for sure, for sure. Okay, we're going to have to start winding things up here, Gary. So I just want to, you know, I want to talk a bit about you're doing something in Brazil in late September. You've also got a book in the pipeline, I understand, and a documentary. Can you just give us a quick outline of these, please?
Sure. Well, I'm very excited about the Brazil project. There's going to be 5 other academics there. There's an evolutionary biologist, Elizabeth Sartoris, a guy called Peter Russell, Professor Jonathan de Verleville from Texas, Linda Malthouse is going to be there, and it's going to be based in Sao Paulo and Rio, and it's towards a young audience. There's like 600 young people that are, you know, looking for what's happening in the world and looking for, you know, creative ways to move forward in their lives, you know, with what's happening and changing on the planet. So it's an exciting conference that's aimed at people and their own potential, young people and their own potential, and they're going to bring in consciousness and art and creativity and evolution. So I'm very excited about that. That's coming up. I'm excited to see that, you know, in some areas, you know, the crop circles are being taken seriously, and it's linked to young people and their potential and art and creativity and so forth. So that's very exciting for me.
Is there a website for that?
There is, but I don't have the link for it at the moment. I can send that through to you.
Yeah, we'll put it on avalonrising.co.uk. So
sure.
Check it out there.
Yeah,
and you got a book and a documentary.
Yeah. I've been working with Channel 2 of Norway for the last 2 seasons, and they're releasing a documentary connected with the Norwegian researcher Eva Bukesto. And so it's going to be a documentary that's released in Norwegian, and a few weeks after that in English, that's hopefully going to go on worldwide distribution. I'm pleased to say that it's being done by, you know, someone who's done probably 50 or 60 documentaries, and he's retelling the story. And it's going to be 2 documentaries released at the same time. So the first one sort of retells the whole story of the crop circles in a way where people can really get to see where the issues are. And then the second one is, you know, exploring ancient sites. I was in Mexico with him in March, and we went to Chichen Itza and some other wonderful sites. And he's been out to Egypt and filmed and got some wonderful footage. So the second one's including the connection to ancient sites. And there's potentially going to be a third on the future and consciousness in 2012 and so on.
Okay, great.
That's very good. And yeah, and I'm working on my book, which I've been saying I've been doing for years, but I'm getting to a point now where I feel that I've got that. So I'm hoping to finish that by about May. That's my deadline for myself.
Okay, well, it's been really great talking to you, Gary. And if we want to check out your website, it's cropcirclereporter.com. That's all one word. And we're going to have info as well on the avalonrising.co.uk website. And so it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show, Gary. Thanks for coming.
Great to speak to you. Thanks very much for having me on.
Cool, and I'm sure we'll have you back another time. So you've been listening to the Avalon Rising radio show on glastonburyradio.com. Please tune in again every week and check out what we're up to with these amazing guests we've got lined up over the next few weeks. So again, thanks for listening.